Good evening, everybody, and good morning to Dr. Richard Boyatzis, who is joining us from Boston, Massachusetts, United States. We are truly privileged to have Dr. Boyatzis on the Distinguished Speaker Series, brought to you by Executive Education, Dayanand Sagar University, Bengaluru. Richard E. Boyatzis is a distinguished university professor of Case Western Reserve University, professor in the Department of Organization Behavior, Psychology, and Cognitive Science, H.R. Horwitz Professor of Family Business, and adjunct professor in People Organizations at ISADE, Barcelona, Spain. He is a virtual academic celebrity. He has a BS in Aeronautics and Astronautics from MIT, a MS and PhD in Social Psychology from Harvard University. Using his International Change Theory, ICT, he studies sustained desired change at all levels of human endeavor from individuals, teams, organizations, communities, and countries. Specifically, he has been researching and helping and coaching since 1967. He was ranked number 9 most influential international thinker by HR Magazine in 2012 and 2014. He is the author of more than 200 articles on leadership, competencies, emotional intelligence, competency development, coaching, neuroscience, and management education. His course era MOOCs, including Inspiring Leadership Through Emotional Intelligence, has over 1 million enrolled from 215 countries. His 9 books include The Competent Manager, the international bestseller, Primal Leadership with Daniel Goleman and Annie McKee, and Resonant Leadership with Annie McKee, and Helping People Change, Coaching with Compassion, or Lifelong Learning and Growth with Melvin Smith and Ellen Van Oosten. He is fellow of the Association of Psychological Science, the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychology, and the American Psychological Association. I would like to welcome Dr. Richard Boyatzis to this webinar, and would like to recognize the presence of my esteemed faculty colleagues, students, and in particular, Mr. Jayaraj, Indian Administrative Service, an advisor to the board here at DSU, and a mentor to all of us. Good evening, and I would like to quickly hand over to Dr. Boyatzis. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening all. I'm delighted to be with you. And I think of all of the various topics I could approach you with, I think what I should do is talk about, from our research, the specific studies that I've been doing over the past 50 years, but focusing a lot on the last 30 years, and some of the physiological studies, to really look at what is it that you need to have if you are to be an effective professional, an effective leader, if you're to inspire other people, if you're to feel engaged. And given the amount of ambient stress we are all feeling around the world because of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of these things have to do with your sustainability as a human being, as a person right now. So what I'm going to do is focus on what are the 4 things that normally you should be able to get when you're learning, but you don't, because hardly any MBA program allows you to get that. What we're going to do is, I'll go over these things. I'm going to conduct 2 exercises during my remarks, and then hopefully, if you're not already signing into the chat box, I'll get your answers there. And then if we end in enough time, I'll be, before my 3 hours are up, I'll be able to answer any questions. I'm hoping you'll get copies of these slides. So if somehow you don't have them yet, if Professor, you could extend the copies to all the students, I'd appreciate that. So they, one, have my email, but also can look up some of the sources if they want. Well, obviously, I'm being playful with the idea of making you rich, famous, thin, and happy. I mean, not everyone in India can become Mr. Ambani or start a family business like the Tatas. But, Naranya Murthy started out building a small family business in Bangalore and ended up creating a massive global company, amazingly successful, and starting a tradition. And that ends up being the kind of thing. I'm really talking about what is it that you want to make something out of your life. The first thing is going to sound a little odd, but it's to maximize your learning, you have to focus on your personal sustainability. In other words, right now, you're in your program. Now, you haven't finished it yet, but you're in your program. I don't know if you're full-time or part-time, but you probably have at least some responsibilities within your families. And some of you may be working as well. With all of that going on, it's not hard to forget yourself and to think that taking courses is what your program is about. I've been a part of research on outcomes. Do people actually change or learn anything beyond the 2 or 3 months after they finish a course or finish a whole program? And it's very clear from studies in all sorts of universities that it's really amazing how little people learn. But if you look at what are the most powerful developmental activities in a graduate program, excuse me, but I'm talking as a professor, so I hope not to embarrass the other professors on the line, but it's not the courses. The courses are merely, in a sense, an excuse to get into the activities, the projects, and the other activities that you really learn from. But the problem is, here you are spending all of this time and a certain amount of money. How do you know you're going to be able to hold on to anything? I mean, look, as a professor, I know the worst way, the most inefficient way to assess whether or not you're learning something is an exam. Grades are, and we've known this since the late 70s, grades in universities and graduate schools predict conformity and conscientiousness. They have never had a consistent prediction to effectiveness. So you want to be a good manager? Get the minimum grade you can to graduate, because spending a lot of your time to get a higher grade doesn't help unless you're trying to get a job and you want to curry favor with the professor. So, I mean, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but the question is, how do you balance things? So what I'm doing is confronting something that's very important. I mean, one of the studies done by a group of my senior colleagues at one of the top 20 ranked MBA programs in the United States is that, and this was done of the full-time MBAs, so in the US, typically they're 28 years old, they've had at least 5 years of work experience after they graduated with their undergraduate degree, and they go in and they take their courses. This is full-time MBA. And they wanted to determine how long people could remember the things that they learned, they said they learned, in their required first accounting course, kind of basic to the whole MBA. And they found that the half-life of knowledge was 6.5 weeks, that these 28-year-olds could only reproduce on the same final exam half of what they had 6.5 weeks earlier. And I'm afraid to say most of us know from our undergraduate experience that as each month goes on, you remember less and less. I mean, if you look back to your undergraduate years, you're lucky if you can remember anything other than the color of the textbook. Why? This is why. Most of the things that happen during university life, undergraduate or graduate, are focused around adding stress. And the fact is that we already have too much stress in our lives. At the doses we get, and I'm talking about not acute stress like the COVID-19 crisis, which amps it up, but even the annoying stress. Your cell phone drops a call, your computer doesn't work right. You can't, you're preparing a dish and you can't find all the right ingredients. Those are what's called annoying stress. It is the total of the annoying stress in a typical day for most of us who work and have families that causes cognitive and perceptual and emotional impairment. Stress helps you get up in the morning, but it's not good. Unless you're really lazy and don't do anything, then you need more stress. But for most of us, the real problem is impairment. Why? Well, when one of these minor stress episodes occurs, our body goes into this automatic defense mode. And within thousandths of a second, deeply unconscious, we start to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream. These are endocrines, which are both hormones and neurotransmitters that immediately shunt blood from our distal capillaries in our ears, nose, fingers, etc., to our large muscle groups in our arms and legs so we can fight or flight. But it's also doing the same thing in your brain. Your body decides which networks in your brain are most important, and they don't pick on the networks that have to do with sensitivity to other people or social networking. They pick on what will keep you breathing. And as a result of this, your blood pressure goes up, your pulse rate goes up. Now, at the same time, your body is secreting a series of corticosteroids, CRH, CRF, ACTH. Cortisol then enters your bloodstream. And it's good because it's your natural anti-inflammatory. But one of the impacts of cortisol in your bloodstream is that it turns off your immune system. So within minutes, your immunoglobulin A and natural killer T cells are so significantly low that you are really ripe to pick up any bug out there, bacteria or virus. And the second issue is that basically cortisol stops neurogenesis. You're losing about 85,000 neurons today. They're dying. And if you don't replace them, what's going to happen in your brain, it's going to quickly, by the time you reach 40, it's going to look spongy with these big gaps like an autopsied Alzheimer's patient or dementia patient. So you have to be producing new neurons. Well, that's called neurogenesis, the conversion of stem cells. When you're an adult, which is classified psychologically as 26, but after you become an adult, it's stem cells from your hippocampus and your olfactory lobe in your brain that can still turn into new neurons. When you have these annoying episodes of stress, it stops neurogenesis. So not only can't you learn, but you can't see things that well. You don't feel good. You feel off. You feel tense, maybe impatient. And then somebody comes along and says, well, where's that report that's due Friday? And you say, what's it to you? Which, outside of a city like New York is considered a defensive response. So the fact is that we start to see things as threatening that aren't. This is why a lot of activity on social media leads people to end up having more stress and anxiety. There's nothing on social media which comes out as good, typically. And the more frequent use of Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of these things ends up stimulating more and more defensiveness. And we know that from the neurological studies. That actually activates parts of the brain that put you into this defensive mode. So, when you think about it, and you know that as soon as your immune system starts to drop, you are eligible for all of these bacterias, flus, viruses, ulcers, and on top of that, you've got high blood pressure and possibly hyperlipidemia from the epinephrine, norepinephrine secretion. So all this is going on. So the interesting question is, how come you're not dead? Well, you may be. And if you are, is this what you thought heaven would be? If not, then this is why you're not dead. your body has an automatic way to counterbalance the sympathetic nervous system, and that's called the parasympathetic nervous system. And when this takes over, your body secretes a different set of hormones, endocrines, primarily oxytocin for women, primarily vasopressin for men, and they end up doing the opposite. They open up your capillaries. So all of a sudden your blood flows further in your body, your pulse rate drops, your breathing slows down, gets deeper, your blood pressure drops, and it's in this state that your immune system clicks into high gear. It's in this state that you're cognitively at your best. So the challenge that we have every day is, how do we balance off all of these moments of stress with moments of renewal, which is our handy way of calling the parasympathetic. Now we know from, I don't put something on this list until it's had 5 published studies in high credible academic journals. We know that meditation helps. We know that yoga helps. We know that Tai Chi helps. We know that prayer to a loving God helps, not a vengeful God. We know that exercise helps if it's modest. We know that feeling hopeful about the future helps. We know that being in a loving relationship helps. I mean, it doesn't mean you should go out and try to find somebody for the weekend, because that's not exactly the kind of loving relationship we're talking about. Something that has a certain stability to it. We know that helping people who are less fortunate helps. Helping the elderly helps. I always say it's important to students to help their elderly professors. We also know that this is where having a dog, cat, horse, or monkey really helps, because, and this is the one we've known since the 70s, the stroking is what produces this renewal response in you and then the animal, and then you go back and forth. We know that laughter and joy and playfulness helps. Happiness is not so clear, but laughter, joy, and playfulness, and a walk in nature really helps. So I didn't have a chance to send you the personal sustainability index, but it would give you a feel for how you're doing on that. Now, I just realized that a bunch of you may have raised your hands. I wasn't paying attention to the chat box. Okay, nobody else. Okay, let me go through the second one. The second one is to build better relationship. Well, 2 people raised their hands, and sorry, I don't. What do I do with that? Rajan, somebody? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Hello? Nobody's out there?
Yeah, I think the people who raise their hands, if they can maybe type the question that they want to ask, if they have a question.
Sure, that would probably be easier in terms of, there will be a point in which I will stop, but sometimes it's useful to know what people are thinking about. Okay, so the second thing, so the first is you have to sustain yourself. You have to feel healthier. And by the way, one of them is sleep. It turns out you need at least 7.5 hours of sleep a night. If you're getting less than that, you may think you're learning because you're studying more, but you're actually dumping it very quickly. And in fact, it's been linked to the secretion of a neurotransmitter called BNDF in your hippocampus. And if you don't get enough sleep, it doesn't help you unlearn and then relearn things you did the prior day. And getting less than 7.5 hours or so sleep a night, and it has to be a continuous, because it has to do with being able to go through the REM cycles. So short naps don't help the same way. That you really need that to sustain yourself. Well, the other thing that you need to learn more, to retain more, and therefore later to be a better manager or leader or professional, is to have better relationships. by far the most important thing you develop in school, in graduate programs, are relationships. Everybody talks about the social networking. Well, those relationships are key. And as most of us know personally, but other people would tell us if we don't, it's our relationships that make a difference in life. Now, part of that is because of emotional contagion. We are hardwired to pick up on the emotions of others. We do it in 8 to 40 thousandths of a second, positive or negative. And the only people who can't do it are people with autism spectrum disorder. So the question that anybody should ask themselves is, how am I infecting the people around us? And as soon as you're in a position of authority as a manager or a leader or a consultant, you are more infectious. Well, the key ends up being building relationships, dyads, teams, even whole organizations, that you have more of the sustainable properties, the renewing properties in them. And those, on the basis of a little over 3 dozen published studies now that various doctoral students working with me or I have done in the last 10 years, have been showing that it's the degree of shared sense of vision, purpose, compassion, caring, and energy that are key. Because these are the experiences in our relationships that help each of us renew. And that's where, as I just pointed out, we're at our cognitive best. We can do the best analytic and creative work, and we're the most open to other people. So that leads me to our first exercise. And what I'd like to do for the exercise is to raise the question, who brought out the best in you? When you think of a leader or manager you worked for in the past, think of somebody who really made you feel like you wanted to give your all versus a leader who did not bring out the best in you, somebody you thought was a lump. Whatever they were paid, it was too much, even if it was a volunteer organization. So the question ends up being, what were they saying or doing? So if you remember the person who brought out the best in you, remember somebody who didn't, what kinds of things were they saying or doing? I'd like you to remember them, remember a few specific moments, and then write in the chat box some brief descriptions, a word or phrase about how did they make you feel, what were they saying or doing, how did they make you feel? Somebody said they gave you freedom. Somebody wrote in the chat box that said they made you feel good, but that's not specific enough anymore. Made you feel confident. Felt safe. They set clear goals. They gave autonomy for decisions. They trusted you. They helped you to overcome your fears. They kept you engaged and motivated, challenged. You felt appreciated. Again, more saying you felt a sense of freedom. The person believed in you. You felt confident. They were consistent. They didn't say one thing and do another. They believed in what you were doing. They had a clear vision. They gave you recognition. The toxic ones do very often the opposite. They pushed you to be your best. They felt confident that you felt that they believed in you. Confidence. You were able to do things you never thought you were able to do before. You felt important, significant. The negative managers, the ones who did not bring out the best in you, were micromanaged, suspicious. Good ones inspired. The ones who did not bring out the best in you made you feel demotivated. sometimes people describe it as deflating. They just take the wind out. They use techniques like divide and rule, always corrected you when you were wrong, micromanaged. They belittled you. Yeah, it's kind of insecure, disgusting stuff. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, I would contend that what this means is what I was just saying before, that the most effective leaders are the ones who motivate you. The crucial issue, we are having a motivation crisis throughout the world, and this is before COVID-19, because even prior to this pandemic, the engagement numbers in the United States, 76% of the people with full-time jobs did not feel engaged. In Europe, it was 83%. In Japan, 81%. I don't know what it was in India, but I'll bet you that most of the people, 4 out of 5 people with full-time jobs, did not feel engaged in their work, which meant not all of the person was showing up. Their body may be, but not their creativity, their talent. That's a motivation crisis. What's at the source of it? The single most likely predictor has little to do with pay. Actually, in surveys of recent MBA graduates following them a year and 2 years later, pay is the 7th factor as to why they join an organization and why they stay. The first 6 have to do with a sense of growth and opportunity that's rested in relationships to their peers and in particular to their boss or supervisor. So the people who leverage the most out of you, who activate your capability, are the ones who have a relationship with you. It's a personal relationship, and we call it a resonant relationship. If you ever hear somebody say, well, don't take it personally, it's just business, you're listening to a real idiot, because nobody thinks that relationships at work aren't personal. Of course they are. And the only time somebody says, well, it's not personal, is somebody with more power abusing somebody with less power, and that's how they rationalize it to themselves. How you treat every person around you is a reflection of what you think is important and whether or not you care. And as you know, your job in the future, not as an analyst, that's to analyze things, but as a manager, supervisor, a leader, an executive, is to inspire others, not to do the work yourself. One of the largest reasons why you were saying it, people do micromanaging. Perfectionist managers and leaders are the most horrible, like perfectionist parents are. And we know from prior studies that if extreme perfectionist parents can produce psychopathology in the children in later life. So perfectionism ends up being this horrible thing because it rules out experimentation and innovation. But the nature of these better relationships are one in which people inspire others through a sense of hope, which very often is expressed in terms of the vision or the purpose, not the goals. So when you stop and ask the question, why do we exist as an organization? I can assure you there is no company, no organization anywhere in the world that exists to make money. They exist to create products or services or provide services. They exist to help others in some form. And whether or not they're making money is a measure of how well they're doing, but it's not their purpose. And confusing the measure and the purpose leads a lot of people to be ineffective and to become dissonant managers. The second characteristic, a number of you talked about, they cared about you. They trusted you, and you felt more confident in the result. A third characteristic is mindfulness. They were consistent in how they operated. So all this stuff leads to a key question. Are you an effective leader? And the answer, the litmus test, is fairly easy. Are people inspired? So when you think about the faculty, let me speak to my faculty colleagues for a moment. When people leave a discussion in your office, when they leave a conversation in the hall, when they leave a seminar or your class, do they feel excited and inspired? Because if they don't, you're not being an effective leader. I mean, you can complain about their motivation, but that's not the real issue. You've got the power. And the same thing for those of you who are students who are working. When people have a conversation with you, do they walk away feeling charged up? They should. How do we know? Well, we actually did an Fmri study. And we used, for this study, we had 49-year-old executives talking about leaders who brought out the best in them versus those that didn't. And we found that, and then we put them into a functional magnetic resonance machine. They listened to specific recordings, 8-second to 10-second recordings of specific moments they had with 6 resonant moments and 6 dissonant moments with their own people in their past. And it was very clear that mirror neuron systems were activated by the resonant leaders and deactivated, suppressed by the dissonant leaders. That's the network in the brain that allows you to mimic the behavior of others. But the most important issue was that the empathic network in the brain, which is technically called the default mode network, was activated by people remembering, even years later, remembering moments with dissonant leaders, and was suppressed when people remembered the dissonant leaders. Now, we have in our brain 2 major networks. We have many, many networks, but 2 of them that account for a lot of activity at home and at work are what's called the Analytic Network, which is the task positive network, anterior cingulate cortex, parts of the prefrontal cortex, and the empathic network, technically the default mode network, posterior cingulate cortex, lower part of the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, parts of the cingulate insula. It's not right brain, left brain. That's 90s pop psych that turns out to be not true. They are right and left parts of every part of the brain, and they all do different things. So that's kind of bull. But this has been studied since 1995, and this good friend of mine and colleague at Case Western Reserve, Tony Jack, showed in this landmark study with a very large sample how, yet again, we know that the analytic network and the empathic network have almost no overlap, and they suppress each other. They suppress each other. The analytic network is good for making decisions or solving problems or doing any kind of analysis, anything with abstractions. In an MBA program, it's anything with finance, accounting, economics, statistics, operations, supply chain, all of the IT, all of those things activate the analytic network. The empathic network helps you to be open to new ideas, like i.e. learn, and be open to other people, especially those who are different than you are. But these 2 networks suppress each other. I was a part of doing studies for the group that accredits MBA programs and management schools throughout the US, now in Europe, AACSB, in the 80s and 90s. And we showed how in above average MBA programs, and my set of studies that I was leading and those of 2 other colleagues, when you put them together, is that most full-time MBAs graduate with statistically significantly less social intelligence than they had when they entered. Now, why are we squeezing out of them the one thing that predicts effectiveness as a leader or a manager in a supposedly management program? You stop and think about the courses that you're exposed to. Okay, analytic network, empathic network. So in the first semester, you get a course in accounting. You get a course in statistics. You get a course in economics. You get a course in finance. And somebody says, let's teach a course on leadership. Let's have them analyze Harvard Business School cases. No wonder poor MBAs have their social intelligence abilities, their abilities to interact with others and be an effective leader and manager shrink during this onslaught. Look what happens in organizations. I was one of the first people to publish a study in 1970 showing how important goals were to change. it is now clear that they are useful later in the process. But every time management adds another goal to people's dashboard, adds another metric, they do it because they want to motivate people. What they don't realize is all of that initially activates the analytic network, which suppresses the openness to new ideas. This is absolutely crucial, because we very often try to manage and inspire others with analytic processes when in fact we're doing the opposite. The person feels it like they're being bullied and it doesn't help. I mean, we know from social psychology that you can never convince somebody of an idea with a rational argument. You convince them with an emotional argument, which they then use a rational argument to justify later. That's why when somebody says, give me the numbers, give me the analysis, they actually don't want the numbers and the analysis. They say they do, but what they're looking for is assurance, and you can give them statistics. I mean, the exercise I had you do was more powerful than anything else I'll do, and then other one I'm going to do, anything else I'm going to do in this talk, because that's where you somehow engage the empathic network. So you think of these two networks like a seesaw. You cannot activate them both at the same time. In the rare case that somebody has, again, usually you see extreme psychopathology result. So what you're talking about is learning. How do you learn to go back and forth in thousandths of a second or a quarter of a second, which is deeply unconscious? You learn it through training and experience. So one of the reasons why team projects are so important, relationships are so important in MBA courses, and why emotions are so important is because it's the only thing that creates the counterbalance to all the analytic stuff you're getting. Now, it's not because your finance or your accounting professors are mean and want to destroy any sense of interpersonal ability you have. It's just the field. And that's what it activates. So one of the reasons why a lot of people who are drawn into a particular silo end up not being effective as a general manager, a functional silo, is because they overemphasize one or the other. Okay, third is the only antidote to rampant narcissism. Narcissism is rampant throughout the world. Prior to the COVID-19, I think I was in, and even at the beginning of it, I think I was in 6, 7 countries over the prior 6 months. Everywhere in the world, people are suffering from rampant narcissism. And the only antidote is to care for somebody else. Nothing else gets you outside of yourself. So I am not just suggesting, but saying on the basis of the research that the more you help your colleagues, the more you truly help your family members, the more effective you'll be. But here's a catch. You have to be helping them with what we call compassion. Most of the time when you try to help somebody, you're pushing them around. You're a helping bully. You're giving them feedback. We know that when people give other people feedback, most of the time it has not been asked for, and it ends up pushing people into a defensive mode. It literally, it's like setting goals. Setting goals and giving people feedback exaggerate the analytic network. Again, and they shrink, therefore, the openness to new ideas in people. So there's a whole lot of our mythology that we do that ends up not working very well. I mean, why are so many? I mean, my research since 1970 on competencies continues to show, even to today, in studies that I do with various graduate students in the different countries where I'm supervising folks, shows that about 70 to 80% of all the people in management or leadership in any organization, government or private sector, large or small, 70 to 80% of them aren't adding value. They could be taking out of their their administrative or management position in the organization would function more smoothly. I like to tease deans about saying, you know, how would the faculty function if all of a sudden the dean went on vacation for 6 to 8 months? You know, and faculty usually laugh and say pretty well. And it's not to say that the dean isn't important, but the reason why the median tenure of a dean in a management school is 3 years is that most of them aren't very good at it. And I'm not just picking on deans, this is true of anybody in professional, in managerial or leadership positions. And part of it is the way they try to motivate other people ends up doing the opposite. It turns people off. It makes them feel, like I said, bullied. So let me do an exercise right now and see if I can get you to understand this. I want probably on a piece of paper in front of you, you to answer the question. Think of several people, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in your life who have helped you the most, your whole life, not just work, who have helped you become who you are or get to where you are. So think of a few people. As you think of each of these people, what I want you to do now is think of a moment that you had with them in which you learned something important. And right next to their name, write down, what did they say or do in that moment in which you felt you learned something important? I'll give you a little bit of time to do that reflection and to write down some of your answers. People who helped you the most in your life become who you are or get to where you are. Thinking of a key moment, what did they say or do? Now, what I'd like you to do is to go into the chat box and see if you could write a few words or phrases. You don't have to tell me who the person was, but write a few words or phrases about how they made you feel. How did you feel at the time, but how are you feeling right now as you remember that person in that moment? You felt believed in, encouraged. They lifted your spirits. You felt respected, calm, fearless. You felt excited. You're feeling grateful now and valued, encouraged, confident, feeling blessed. That made you believe in yourself, passionate, helped you realize your strengths. They let you be vulnerable and were forgiving. You felt curious. You believed in, they and you believed in your abilities, that you can excel and reach great heights. They helped you see your potential. Felt inspired, challenged. Felt a spiritual connection, a sense of direction, and inspired, grateful, gratitude. One person said they felt miserable when they were belittled at school, but that enabled them to learn the art of kindness, and feel more valued in life. Felt motivated. Again, I wanted to talk about not what they taught you, but how you felt about it. In that sense, what they taught you inspired you. Okay, so what does that have to do with what we were talking about? A lot. I've done this exercise on all 7 continents, yes, including Antarctica, and I've done it in over 65 countries. And most people, whether we're in Astana, Kazakhstan, or Milano, or Chicago, people answer very similarly to the way you did. Most people start out when they remember these people and these moments feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Oh my God, they loved me. They cared about me that much. Felt appreciated. People often feel excited in remembering that moment, or sometimes nobody here reported it that I could see, but it was the comments were going fast. Sometimes people report being somewhat serene. And sometimes people report feeling nostalgic. This happens usually with, older audiences. I mean, older being, over 40 or 50, that some of these people have passed away and you feel sad of their loss. And sometimes people report feeling close to the others they're interacting with right now because they're talking about or remembering these moments from the past. If you had any of those feelings, if you didn't, then don't worry about it. But if you had any of those feelings, not all, you just had about 6 minutes in the parasympathetic nervous system. You just had a moment of renewal. We know what it feels like to be stressed. We don't know what it feels like. We don't know the biomarkers, the somatic markers of what it feels like to be in renewal. We confuse it with rest. It's not. Relaxation. It's not. Boredom. It's not. And by the way, if you haven't had a chance to talk in the last few weeks with somebody on that list, give them a call today, tomorrow. Don't just email, call. Say, I was thinking of you. Thank you. If they passed away, sit down with a photo album, make a cup of tea, and just spend some time remembering them. What a great way to honor their gift to you. Look, the most important question I'm going to ask you today in this whole session, we're not going to analyze, but I want to pose it. Whose list would you be on? Whose list will you be on? Because that's our only legacy in life. It's not our personal net worth when we die. It's the people that we've touched, we've inspired. Okay, so what does this have to do with what I'm talking about today? I started in 1967 to study personal change. I had been designing in the early and mid 60s. I was studying aerospace. I was learning, I was focused on control systems for interplanetary vehicles. That was what I designed. I was putting myself through MIT, so I had to go out and work for a while. I went out and worked at Northrop Norair as a scientist, designing various spacecraft, and got bored with it. So I went back to MIT and I said, oh, what am I going to do? My parents are immigrants from Greece, and my father got over just in time to get drafted into the U.S. Army and secure the Panama Canal Zone with his company, and then land on Omaha Beach and with the American forces go through France and Germany. He got out, and even though he'd started university in Greece, by the time he got out in New York, he'd met my mother, they got married. So he did what every Greek male on the U.S. side of the Atlantic that I knew did, and went into the restaurant business. I'd done that for a number of summers, working. And I knew I didn't want to go into the restaurant business. I had about 6 different bands. We played a lot of different events when I was in high school, and a little bit at MIT, and I'd saved money, helped to pay my way through school with that. But I knew I loved the music, but I wasn't that good that I could do it professionally. So I said, okay, I'll be a manager. It's got to be easy. Look at these idiots we had out at Northrop. I mean, we had two old departments that I was working in of Sheldons, if you follow Big Bang Theory, really super geeky guys. They were all guys in those days, in the early mid 60s. And the managers got so little out of us that they could have. But at any rate, so I go to sign up for a management course at MIT at the Sloan School. And they had this thing where if you didn't have the prereqs, they had the professors that had the 8 courses you could sign up for describe their course. So this one young fellow who was just finishing his PhD, actually hadn't finished it at Harvard, but who was on the faculty at MIT, he described his course in organizational psychology, which I thought was absolute bull. I mean, it sounded ridiculous. But during his description, he said 2 words that made me literally run to his classroom in the basement of the Sloan School and get in, which I did because everything was capacity controlled. And the 2 words were no tests. My own phobia about taking tests had always made them very, very traumatic events for me. And little did I know that what I know now is neurologically and hormonally, tests are horrible ways to evaluate people. There's so many more creative and useful ways, but tests stimulate stress and therefore stimulate forgetting in everybody at a very rapid rate. So testing is not a good technique for learning assessment. But at any rate, in a conversation with him, I ended up talking about my experiences at Northrop, and he said, well, he had data. Would I like to analyze some of his data that he had not analyzed yet on how graduate students at MIT helped or didn't help each other? We started to do it, and that was the first published empirical study I had in 1970. Came out finally in 1970. And it was the beginning of this theory. So I've been working on this theory for 50 some years. And basically what you need complexity theory to understand how people change individually or in couples, dyads, teams, organizations, communities, whole countries. And when you realize that you need complexity theory because change is discontinuous and nonlinear, you also realize that the moments of emergence when something pops are the ones where first a person has a epiphany about who they would like to become, some dream about their future, not a goal, a dream. If you have that, you're eligible for the second discovery. If you don't, there's less than a 5% chance you will continue in the change process or sustain it. The second discovery is how do you come across to others, which is what I call the real self. And then the instant comparison to the ideal, you come up with a personalized balance sheet. So if the output from the first discovery is a personal vision statement, the output from the second is a personal balance sheet. And the third is a learning agenda, which is not a performance improvement plan. This is a sense of how can you pursue your vision? How can you use your strengths? How can you work on a few weaknesses? But a learning agenda is the way to get to something you would love to be doing. The fourth discovery are the moments of experimenting and practicing with the new thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And the fifth discovery are these key moments. What our research since 2000 has focused on is how in 2-person relationships, whether they're peers or boss subordinate or physician, patient, teacher, student, that 80 to 100% of all of the incidents people think of when we just did that exercise and we have doctoral students interview them for several hours, 80 to 100% of all the incidents have to do with somebody who helped you open up a possibility in life, helped you to dream about a dream. Not that they said, oh, well, you're a girl, you should be a nurse. That's not opening up a dream. That's telling you what to do. And even though they may love you and they may do it for good reasons, you still feel as if you're getting pushed around. But you might have thought a moment with one of your parents or grandparents, a teacher, an early manager, a coach. Later in life, you may discover, even with a spouse or partner, where the conversation was, wow, have you considered? Wouldn't that be great? And the reason this is important is that when we do the research, we ask the converse. Tell me about anybody in the last 2 years who's tried to help you change. And 67% of all of the incidents, every time we do that study, they gave us feedback about how we're doing, the real self, and they focused on our weaknesses. So that tells you that inside of each one of us, we have two emotional attractors. They are, in complexity terms, strange attractors, Lorenz attractors. The positive emotional attractor, I call a PEA, is being in the parasympathetic nervous system. It's being in the empathic neural network activation and thinking positive thoughts, positive affect. The negative emotional attractor, NEA, is being in the sympathetic or stress response, activating the analytic network, and basically thinking critically or negative. It's the difference between thinking about possibilities versus problems, dreams versus expectation, optimism versus pessimism, hope versus fear, strengths versus weaknesses, excited about trying something versus feeling obligated to do it. The two most important observations of this talk are, one, that sustained desired change almost always starts in the positive emotional attractor, not the negative. We need the negative emotional attractor. It's why I call the two thrive and survive. You need to survive, especially if somebody's about to shoot or hit you. But if you live your life only surviving, it's a hollow life. It's bad. It's dull. It's depressing at times. You need the thriving, the flourishing, to be excited about life. This is why treatment adherence is so poor. The percentage of people who get diagnosed type 2 diabetes, who actually do what their doctor, physician, or nurse tells them to do, even in India, is about 50%. Coronary bypass surgery patients, about 20%. Why do people do so little of what their physicians or nurses tell them? It's because they almost always focus on the NEA. This is what's going to happen if you don't take your medicine, if you don't exercise, if you don't lose weight. And as soon as you go into the NEA, a person starts to close down. One study showed that if you sprayed epinephrine into a person's nostrils, precipitated a stress response, their peripheral vision, which is normally 180 degrees, ends up going down to about 30 degrees. That's your field of vision. And by the way, if you sprayed oxytocin into a person's nose, which stimulates the parasympathetic, the renewal response, it opens back up. So one of the problems is that when we give people feedback, especially numeric feedback or evaluative feedback, we activate the whole NEA stress response. People close down, defend themselves. Sustained desired change starts in the positive emotional attractor. Now, because you need a balance in life, and the negative is always stronger than the positive in terms of strength of emotions, you need to oversample the positive. Barb Fredrickson has shown in teams, there has to be a 3-to-1 ratio of positive versus negative comments in the team. And constructive criticism is still criticism, it's negative. John Gottman has showed long-term loving, stable marriages is a 5-to-1 ratio. We showed in our coaching studies, neurological studies, there has to be a 2 to 3-to-1 ratio. We know that this really works. We have a total of 39 longitudinal studies. Here I'm going to report the results of the first 32 of MBAs, showing a huge increase in emotional and social intelligence, which are predictive of effective management, leadership, and professional roles within a year of entering the MBA program. And it stabilizes, it drops off 5 to 7 years at about a 50% improvement. Now, the reason this is so impressive, when I and others did these studies of above average MBA programs, we found that the average of above average MBA programs was a 2% increase within 1 to 2 years, and then it drops lower. Company training programs and government training programs, 11% in any study in the scientific literature since 1950 anywhere in the world. And within 3 months, it drops off. How do we get such dramatic results? Because we emphasize vision. The whole first third of our leadership emotional intelligence course is all about the person's vision, writing it. And then secondly, they talk to a trained coach, often a graduate student, doctoral student, sometimes faculty or staff, that's trained in coaching with compassion to coach more to the PEA than the NEA. And then later, when we start giving in the middle of the course feedback and other things, we actually have them do some peer coaching. We tested this with a series of Fmri studies in which we had people talk for 30 minutes about their vision versus how they were doing. These were with undergraduates. And sure enough, the 30 minutes to talking about your vision stimulated the lateral visual cortex where you imagine things, and a bunch of other things related to the PEA. And we replicated it several years later. We published that study eventually, but we replicated with 50 undergraduates, half male and half female, found the same things. And that when you did coaching with compassion, you coached to the person's ideas, the person's vision, not yours. You weren't being a coaching bully. You activated the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is the direct link from Nancy Eisenberger's studies with the parasympathetic nervous system. So we did a study of engineering effectiveness in a large multinational. Half of the sample came from their European division, which had a wide variety of Europeans and Middle Easterners, and half came from the US division, which had some Americans, North and South Americans, but mostly Asians, Indians, and Chinese. And what we were able to show that engineering effectiveness was predicted by the 360, what their other project mates saw in terms of a person's emotional and social intelligence behavior, not self-assessed. And it predicted a third of their effectiveness. It was huge statistically. And IQ did not, and personality did not. And their sense of engagement in their work was predicted by the degree of shared vision. This was a study done in Pakistan by Masood Khawaja, a doctoral student of mine who was also an MD, showing that the thing that affected treatment adherence the most was the degree to which the patient thought their physician had the same vision, not goals, vision, as they did. Ellen Van Oosten did this with top 100 executives in one of the 15 largest banks in the US, and showed that if the coaching relationship was using more coaching with compassion, it amplified the effect of emotional and social intelligence on their leadership effectiveness. So if you want to help somebody, help them through compassion, listening to them, drawing them out. Don't push them around. And you don't want to anchor your helping of any sort with problem solving, because that's, again, analytic mode, and it closes them down. I don't have time to go into all the other levels because I realize I have gone over a bit. Our latest book, Helping People Change, reviews a lot of this research in very clear. It's written for normal people we call practitioners. It came out from Harvard Business Review during this last year, and it's available on Amazon, and I love it. I mean, we tell a lot of stories of people at different stages in life, and everything from physicians to parents to managers and executives, and how helping can work, not how it usually doesn't. As a professor said at the beginning, we have 2 MOOCs that are free for at least a week, one on leadership, one on coaching, and then Professor Diana Billamorian, our chair of our department, has one on women in leadership. So let me, before I end, let me use this as a moment to see if I can open it up to questions. So I'm going to stop the sharing and ask you if you would like to ask a question or share a comment, please raise your hand and the professor will unmute you. I'd like to hear you actually ask the question with your audio and video if possible. I mean, you could write it in, but I'd rather hear the person ask the question. $280 people and nobody has a question? I must have really been boring. I must have been horrible if that's the case. How do I propose to make it more likely that a person does PEA than NEA? Well, first, you have to feel PEA yourself. So you have to spend time doing more of these renewing activities. And then you have to start treating other people not like they're slaves or pawns, or they're beneath you, or you know better. You should treat them with a resonant, caring relationship. Listen to their dreams. Listen to their values. Okay, so nobody's
yes,
unmuted yet.
yes,
Good.
yes.
Thank
So,
you.
so sorry. So, we have Imtiaz. Can you please unmute my student Parthasarathi Deshpande? You can see him right up there with his hand up. Can you please unmute him?
And get ready to unmute the next person while he's
Yeah.
he's asking his question, please.
Imtiaz? Oh, I can do that myself. Yeah. Yeah, Parthasarathi, you can go ahead.
Yes, yeah. Good morning, Mr. Richard. I have experience about 5-6 years in IT sector before joining MBA. So what my question is, see, there's a human tendency of cherry picking mistakes. Say if you're even doing 10 things right, the manager leader
Right.
would only look at 2 things you've done wrong, and your appraisal would be affected because of that. So what exactly is the manager needs to do? Because it's a human behavior. You looked at the negative things first and then the positive things first. So what is the
let me be very clear. It's not human natural to do that. It is natural to be defensive, but that's defensive. That's not effective. So when a manager does that, they are not being effective. They are not managing you well. So how do you get them to turn around? Well, it's hard because, I mean, they may not be willing to have a conversation with you about their vision. So I sometimes say, give them the right kind of drugs to maybe open up. But I mean, seriously, I'm just joking. Seriously, what you want to do is hope that they can find someone who can help them. Because, and what you should do for your sustainability is get out, leave them. If a person is that defensive and that much of a bully as a manager, you are not going to do well, and it will bring out less and less of you over time. You'll make more mistakes, and it's called the expectation to fail syndrome by one of my colleague friends. So what I'd say is see if they can get some help, and if they can't, just get a transfer, get another job. Sorry, I wish I could tell you that there was a magic pill. Next question.
Sagar, you can go ahead with your question.
Yes.
Sagar,
Hello, Mr. Richard. This is Sagar from India. So, what I wanted to know is when someone actually keeps finding your mistakes, say your boss or seniors, you tend to do more mistakes. When someone is not looking at you, you
Right.
tend to be very good at your work or your job. How is that happens always?
Okay, Sagar, that is a great observation. One of the oldest known, I mean, it's been published for now 35 years, oldest known event in your life or work in which invokes the stress response, which is the NEA. So you start to close down, is when somebody is watching or evaluating you. So whether it's you as a child with one of your parents or you at work with a supervisor, as soon as you feel somebody is watching and evaluating you, you go into a defensive mode. As soon as you go into a defensive mode, your cognitive abilities become impaired. You can't think as clearly. You will not think as openly. And when that happens, you will start, as you said, to make more mistakes. So in life, what you try to do is avoid those people. If you can't, you sometimes try to engage them in being less defensive. Because when people act that way, they don't do it because they're good at something. They do it because they're scared. They themselves are. It's a defensive response. And sometimes you can bring somebody, even your boss, around to feeling more positive about their work and life, but it's harder. If you're younger, if you're less experienced, especially you're in a relatively hierarchical culture in India, they're less likely to sit down and ask you, for feedback about themselves and to listen to it genuinely. So I agree with you. Your observation is exactly right. So first thing, just please don't do it to other people, as whether you're working in student teams or when you are working as a manager. Secondly, if you find yourself caught in that, like I said, find a different manager in your organization and get a transfer. Because people that are that way will just close everyone down. Okay, another question. I hope that helps, Sagar.
Yeah. Professor Rajat Rashmi is my colleague at Dayanand Sagar University. Rajat, you can go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure, Captain. So, Professor, I wanted to ask, but before that, I want to admit that all my life I have spent being scared of competition. And listening to you, I can see that I was not wrong. So,
Right.
what you have explained in your talk is that the common sense aspect of interpersonal relationship is what managers need, right? And so,
Yes.
so basically what business schools are doing is just the opposite of it, that also you mentioned.
Sadly, yes.
Yeah. But then we also know that common sense doesn't come easily to people. So what should business schools be doing to, equip managers
Right.
to make a difference?
Common sense, it's common sense in some ways, because it's the most basic humane way to teach each other, to relate to each other. So the recipe is that management schools should make sure that the pedagogy used, the way we're teaching, blends both the analytic and the empathic mode of neurologically. And that means that, for example, it doesn't matter what your subject matter is, whether you're teaching organizational behavior or accounting or international economics or finance, rely on projects more than individual assignments. When you rely on projects, make the team small so that people don't hide, and ask the team members to evaluate and comment on how each of them are helping each other. And that helps. Doing things in the real world. So, I mean, I don't bring in guest speakers, but a lot of my colleagues bring in executives from different organizations in the area. The other way, what I used to do, I don't teach MBAs anymore. I just teach master's, executive MBA, master's in OD, and executive doctorate. But when I was teaching in the regular MBA program, I used to have them go out and interview the CEO of a company or of a nonprofit in the area. And I used to make them interview them several times and write what eventually became, I should say, a 100-page case study, evaluating them, talking to their subordinates and peers. I often ask them to talk to their spouse or partner, the CEO's spouse or partner, because I wanted them to assess the CEO in terms of all the course concepts. One of the reasons that exercise worked so well, it was emotional. When they met the CEO, I mean, one of the things they would come back and they would always say, "Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. This person, this man or this woman were so successful. I couldn't believe how well dressed they were and how thin they were." And they would come back with these emotional reactions, and that was good because that helped to say they were opening themselves up to new ideas and perceptions. Now, we needed to move into the analytic, but in schools, we don't have a problem doing that. We do it a lot. So part of it is vary the pedagogy. And part of it is, I go back to what Dave Cole, my mentor and close friend for 53 years now, always did with his experiential learning theory. In every class, as well as every course, as well as a whole program, you should be moving people through abstract, like lectures and concepts, active experimentation, problem sets, concrete experience, emotional experiences, reflective observation. You want to move people through the whole learning cycle. At the program level, you can do it by making sure even early in the program, the students have to go out and interact with real managers, real executives. Don't just wait for a capstone course. Many MBA programs these days are having action learning assignments where they actually will go out to various organizations, for-profit, not-for-profit, in the area and get them to be willing to take on 3, 4, 5, 10 student teams working on different things. So the companies get a benefit, or the nonprofits do, but at the same time, you can do it with government agencies too, but it's a little more complicated when it's the government. Basically, that's another possibility. We wrote a whole book on this that came out in 1995, so I could talk for another 8 hours on it, but I say Sanjoy is raising his hand, so I'd like to go on to somebody else. Thank you for asking, though.
Thanks, Professor.
Professor, we have a question from Miss Matthew. Miss Matthew, could you go ahead, please, quickly? Jacinta Matthew, are you there? Right, Miss Matthew. Shreyas Sinha, I will unmute you. Shreyas, not able to do that for some reason.
Well, Mr. Sanjoy Das is waving his hand. If you could unmute.
So we'll unmute Sanjay Das. He came in. He's in the queue.
Okay.
He's my colleague from Bombay. So we have young Shreyas Sinha here.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for this great opportunity, Captain Sir. So, Dr. Richard, I have 2 questions for you. One of the first ones is that I believe that humans, they have a natural tendency to, get aloof, right? And you had spoken about metrics, narrowing the perception or the creative ability of people, right? In my view.
Whoa. Hold on a second. I don't think human beings have a natural tendency to get aloof. I disagree. I disagree with your first statement.
Okay.
Because although many people in hierarchical societies, you have a more hierarchical society than I live in, and mine is more hierarchical than Australia, for example. In hierarchical societies, there is the assumption that you should respect authority. In less hierarchical societies, we assume authority is either wrong or malevolent. So it's the opposite. When people act aloof, it is almost always because they are scared. So I don't think it's natural. I think being nice to each other is natural. It's more human. Being kind is more human. But I think we see a lot of the other because a lot of people are stressed and scared. So I don't think it's natural, but when people act aloof, now go on with your question. Whoops, I lost you, I guess.
Yeah, we lost him.
Okay.
Commander Joshi, your question?
Sir, I'm there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening to you, Dr. Bayatzis. I'm one of your students. I'm also enrolled in one of your courses of inspirational leadership through EI.
Oh, the Coursera course, right.
Yes, sir. All right. that being said separately, I actually had sent a message privately to you. I have two specific issues. One is that the Indian system was it was not that weekday off kind of a system earlier. That weekday, one day off a week was
Right.
was 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 instituted by the British. Till then, it used to be people would work as long as they want to, and they would take a break whenever they would want. Okay, and that was and that was the time when India contributed 28% to the world's GDP.
Well, and I
So,
must say that that's one of the benefits of having a lot of Indian immigrants in the U.S.
no,
They
so
still work 7 days a
yeah,
week.
that's okay. The question that follows is that is it necessary to have a mandatory week off? Why should not people decide when to take
Right.
off whenever they wish to?
Yeah.
And so the point is that we are trying to enforce something which people do not want. That was my first question.
Well, let me answer the first question, then you can ask the second one.
I'll ask.
The,
All right.
I'm finishing a rewrite of a paper right now, in which we did a series of 6 studies on personal sustainability, proving something. When I was a psychotherapist working with alcoholics and drug addicts in the 70s, I used to say, you have to have a lot of moments of renewal, and you have to have a lot of variety. And but I didn't have the data. Now I have the data to say that that's really true. So does it help to have Saturday or Sunday or Friday off, depending upon your faith? Not necessarily. What you need are moments of renewal, and you need them every day. So if you have a day in which you get up and you either pray or you meditate or do some yoga, and during the day at work, every few hours you take a break for 20 minutes and you have coffee or tea and you chat with somebody, you have a lunch with colleagues, and you do this throughout the day. And when you get home in the evening, you have, another, exciting, positive event. If you do that and you're managing your life so it is sustainable during the rhythm of a day, you aren't going to feel the need to take a break on Saturday or Sunday. Now, very often we do need time to tend to things like doing the grocery shopping. Somebody has to fix the storm door on the house. So sometimes you need time, but the companies that have allowed the maximum flexible time have been getting the most out of people. So with Google, people work their hours and work more than their hours, but they work whichever time of day and whichever day of the week they want to work, unless they're in sales. And that ends up making it possible. So if a person has to they have a young child and they have to bring the young child to the doctor because the child's feeling ill, they take the time off and they make it up later. So I agree with you. I think it should be a lot more left to the person if the person is managing their daily routines with enough renewal. If the person has become very addicted to their tasks and they've become a workaholic and they're ignoring their family and they're ignoring their body, they're ignoring their spiritual practice, then it's horrible. And in fact, I think the very idea of forcing people to take a day off is very often because they're not praying on a regular basis. I mean, most of the time, people take their day of spiritual activity off, but every Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Hindu sect I know of asks us to pray at least twice a day. Okay, so second question. What's your second question? Hello? You had a second question?
Maybe we lost him. So maybe we can take a question from Dr. Anupama.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am.
All right, sir. We are all there. All right. In your slide 3, around 5 to 6 minutes into your discussion, you were talking about the businesses not being in the business of making profit.
I said the purpose of the business was not to make profit. Yes.
Actually, you were overtly or covertly challenging the very idea of the business if it is not going to make profit.
No, I wasn't doing that. Be careful of what I was making a distinction between the purpose of the organization and the measure of how well you're doing.
So allow me to complete. The purpose of an organization is different from the purpose of a business.
Okay, well, the purpose of the business.
The purpose of a business is only to make money, irrespective of how, which way. Drop the ethics, drop everything aside, make money. That is what in my 57 summers that I have, of course, much younger than you, have learned is that businesses only thrive and are there for making money.
I don't know what to say about it other than that is not my experience. And I've built and run businesses too in companies. I've bought and sold them. Believe me, I am a staunch capitalist. So that's not the issue. But I've got to say, when companies think that their reason for existing is to make a profit, they don't do well. They don't sustain themselves over time or over changes. They aren't very adaptive. You can make money in this world doing almost anything. It's not hard to make money. It's hard to continue doing it over time.
That is the fallout. That is the fallout.
Yeah.
But the objective of a business.
Okay, Commander Joshi, we'll have to move on. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. And I have a final question.
No, I'm sorry. We'll have to come back.
No, it's all right. Let him ask the final question. Just as we disagree on the first one. It's okay.
Do you think it should be essential for everyone to have pets? Because stroking helps.
No, because, well, look, some people are allergic. It depends on where you grew up. If your parents were afraid of dogs or cats, you don't have dogs or cats.
Yes.
And, depending upon where in India you live, monkeys are all over the place, but, they aren't personal pets. So the question is, having a pet that you can stroke and pet is a source of renewal.
Renewal.
Not
yes.
everybody, it doesn't work for everybody. And then for those people, let's just hope they can find other techniques.
It was a great pleasure interacting with you, sir.
Thank you very much. Professor Das, your question?
Good evening from India, Dr. Boyatsis. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Okay, just to give the background to my question. Hello. Yeah.
Yes.
I am a person from the corporate sector who's now into academics, and I've spent most of my time in brick and mortar industries, which was heavily manufacturing oriented and dependent. Okay, my question is that compassionate leadership and leadership styles do get you a lot more acceptance of the individuals who are your mentees. But when it comes to mission-specific performance and meeting targets and numbers, if after all that leadership and compassion, the speed is not coming up, then what does one do? And then the more time you spend on leadership, the less time you have available with you to the end of the deadline. So somewhere the person or the individual leader will have to draw the line as to the time he can spend on practicing that leadership, and maybe be forced to take a change in the type of style used to lead his team. What would be your comments?
Yes, in the sense that there always has to be a situational component to it. What I'm raising, though, is that very often if you're in a power position, you confuse getting things done with motivating other people to get things done. That as soon as you're at an executive position, you have to inspire people who 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 actually do the work. You can't do the work. And a lot of people here wrote in on that first exercise, micromanagement. So one of the biggest mistakes people make is when they stop being an individual contributor and they start being a manager, they have to change their whole mindset. I'm no longer a salesman. I'm a sales manager. I'm managing other people so that they sell. I'm no longer the engineer. I'm managing engineers so that they invent things. So I do believe that the shift in role, and I believe that the research has been showing this for 60 or 70 years. That's a key role shift in your mind. The second issue is, I didn't say you only have to be a resonant leader. Sometimes you have to be dissonant, kick ass, fire people, whatever. The problem is, the more you do that, the less sustainability the people around you will have, the less innovation, the less creativity, the less adaptation. So there are times in which I've had to do this. I've had to fire people, close offices, this and that. Sometimes you have to do it to help the organization, but in the process realize that as soon as you put other people watch this, go into a defensive mode, you're now getting less of them. You're getting less of their creativity. So the issue, and we have now concrete results. We know 80% of mergers and acquisitions fail to reach their objectives and in fact usually destroy value. One of my doctoral students showed that establishing a degree of shared vision, not goals, but vision, the dream, the purpose, was more predictive of successful mergers and acquisitions than anything else. Several other doctoral students that I've supervised have shown that the continuing 5 to 7 year financial performance in family businesses has to do with the degree to which they keep establishing resonant leadership and reminding people and practicing shared vision and shared compassion. So I'm not saying, sometimes you don't have to go negative. You do. But it's not the norm. And it's because you need more of the PEA, you have to spend more time in these resonant leadership modes with shared vision and compassion than the other, but sometimes you have to go to the other. Does that help? Okay, good. Then we agree.
So
I have a question.
Dr. Boyatsis, can we take a couple of questions or are we done?
Sure. No, I'm okay.
Okay, you're okay, fine. So I have a question from Dr. Anupama, who's having a little bit of an issue. She's not able to unmute herself. So she says that, organizations realize that they have poor leadership skills. So is it possible for them to identify good leaders and then tag other people to good leaders so that they can shadow them and then learn leadership? Is it possible?
Yes, and that's a fantastic idea. Over the decades, one of the things we all know is that role models really can be helpful. But very often, we don't treat leadership that way. We somehow think, well, because every human being periodically has to be a parent, that people would be good parents. I mean, I don't want to do a study on what percentage of parents aren't very good at it, because my guess is it's going to be like 80% are not very good at it. So the issue is, how do you learn it? Well, the most natural way to learn something behaviorally or emotionally, or to get into the toggle or the cycling of PEA, NEA, and empathic and analytic, is to learn it with others. Peer coaching, I think, is the future of development in organizations. And I think shadowing or spending time with somebody who's very good at something is a great way to do it. The danger is to assume that somebody who's very successful, gets promoted a lot, is effective. When I told you the thing that 70-80% of the people in management or leadership weren't adding value, that includes CEOs. It includes presidents and prime ministers of countries. So the dilemma is, if you can pick people who really do excite the people, get innovation, get adaptation and performance, and have people shadow them, it would be fantastic. Let me, in high tech, which very often everybody assumes has to be more analytic or harsh, doesn't. In fact, we have plenty of research data to suggest it. I mean, two of the most inspirational and resonant leaders in high tech businesses were John Chambers and Narendra Murthy. One of the least resonant, the most dissonant, almost a cancer in his organization, was the head of Oracle. And when you see the contrasts, you realize, okay, Oracle made a lot of money, but most of the key people in any organization they acquired left as soon as they could. 70 to 80% of the key people, executives and professionals in organizations that Cisco acquired, they acquired 15 to 18 a year, under John Chambers' leadership, stayed beyond the payout period. That retention of key talent is a very interesting indicator. So yes, to answer your question, shadowing or finding people, as long as you're sure that they are good at it, not just because they're the boss.
Right.
I have one question, if I'm allowed.
Excuse me, just 1 minute, Professor Shankar. You want to go ahead with your question? Okay, please do.
Yeah. I have a question here, and your lecture was very inspiring, good. I ordered for the book. Is this one of the reasons, you also cited Ambani? Is it the reason when, formative years, companies succeed and their family business, they have mostly closely associated people bringing the business, which later years, second, third generation onwards collapse because of this disconnectedness or whatever it is.
Sorry, somebody muted me. Family businesses are the most natural form of organization, I think. But one of the things that is very clear is that the founders of family businesses that do well, that adapt, don't just make money for one period, but go through the patterns that adapt to competition and changes in technology and so forth, are passionate about the vision. Yes, they make money and they focus on the bottom line, but they don't focus on the bottom line to the exclusion of the vision. And in fact, they're usually famous for talking about the vision or the purpose. And I was just watching, one of my IT executive colleagues sent me a YouTube video of Steve Jobs when he first came back into Apple, which is when he was effective, not the earlier periods, but the third time he was with Apple. Somebody pushed him on something and he said, look, when you keep trying things, you sometimes make mistakes. He said, but what I've got to do is know that if I make mistakes and I have to move on. But I'm not going to know that unless I listen to other people. And it was brilliant, because so many people think of Steve Jobs as somehow this authoritarian ruler. He wasn't when he was effective, which was the third period. And I think that's what gets lost. And very often the second, third, or fourth, or fifth generation in a family, none of the family members want to run the business. They don't want to be a leader. And when that happens, you're better to go outside than to stick within the family. But it's that loss of the sense of purpose, the core values that drove it, that's the most likely to happen.
Right.
Somebody asked a question in the chat about, well, how do you evaluate people? It isn't feedback useful. I would say, well, one of the issues that should be clear from what I'm talking about, because I've been saying this for 40 years, that you should separate performance evaluation from development. Don't do them at the same time. Don't try to have one conversation to review performance, talk about the implications for salary or bonus, and then shift to how are you going to be different? What are you going to try for next year? Because one is analytic mode, the other is empathic mode, and they do not mix. So what I suggest is, and I think everybody needs to have some form of review. Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing to help the organization? But that's the more performance review part, separated by 6 months. If you do one in the morning, do one in the afternoon. If you do one in your office, do the other out at a restaurant. But make them different experiences. Secondly, when you're in the evaluative mode, move toward, and many of our jobs have very clear results. As a professor, I know my objectives are very, very clear. If I'm doing well, I'm producing publishable studies that other people cite. They either get published in high prestige journals or they get cited a lot in other people's research. If I'm a professor in something different that isn't just words, I should be creating new patents. But I also need to be inspiring students. That's a key part of my job. So if the course evaluations don't say the students are really excited, if there isn't follow-up activity later, a year or two later, to say they even remember who I was, nevertheless they really are still thinking about the messages, then it doesn't work. And then the question is, on the service part of being a faculty member, are people asking me to serve on boards of directors or asking me to serve on committees? Do people come to me and ask in the community as well as in the field for help? Now, every faculty member can evaluate themselves pretty well. And I find that except in pure process jobs, even salespeople, engineers, folks in a lot of jobs like that usually know how well they're doing. So when as a manager you want to get into an evaluation, I first ask each subordinate to evaluate themselves. And people are pretty good. People will get about 80% of it right. Or I should say 80% of the people will get it right. And then it doesn't have to come from me. So I think that's useful. If you're using in academics, instead of using tests, which I think, like I said, are the worst way because they speed up the forget rate, use projects. Make people show that they can use the knowledge, not just show that they can parrot it back. I forgot what the second part of the question was, but anyway, are there any other questions that are coming up?
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yeah. Yes. Hi.
I have a very quick question. Math is taught since what, kindergarten? They begin with numbers, then a little addition, but not psychology. While you see that as people grow in their professional life, it is managing one's own emotions and the others' emotions that matters most. So what do you recommend to remedy this situation? Why is math so much more important that it has to be taught from kindergarten and not anything about psychology at that age?
I think it's overcompensation. My wife was a kindergarten teacher. She taught 5-year-olds for 20 some years. And her experience confirms what the research says, that the most important thing to learn in early education, like 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, are two things. One, self-control, and secondly, how to read. So learning math is useful, but it's more important to learn how to read. And it's more important to learn how to exercise self-control, which means emotional self-control. And that's the key. So part of what we're after, and one of the feelings of worries of a lot of people with now during this virus and people all staying at home, is that children playing with each other is a key way for them to learn emotional and social intelligence. We know from the research everywhere it's studied that when young people are taught even 3 to 18 hours over a whole year of emotional intelligence, that they do better in school, they get better grades, they graduate, they don't stay out of school, they get better test scores on standardized tests years later. I mean, the research is very clear. So I think although some people think self-esteem is important, the research doesn't support that. It's emotional self-control and reading. Yes, math is important. I mean, I'm a geek. I've always done math. I even do it now. I mean, if you know, for as much as I'm reading and writing things, if I don't get enough of my mathematics fix in a day, you know, I have to go to the stock market stuff and, you know, or things like that to get my fix. But that's an individual disposition. So I hope that helps. I don't know how much longer anybody wants to go.
I
But,
think it's been a brilliant session, and we will let you go, sir. You've been with us.
Okay, let me then close with a certain thought and just say to anybody here or who sees it later, if people have follow-up questions they want to ask, they can email me. My email's on the cover slide. If they have a story, that's how I get new material. Here's my closing thought. We are living a very special gift from our God, life. This isn't a dress rehearsal. And we owe it to ourselves to be living the most exciting life that we can, if we take a whole perspective on it. So what's exciting to us does not diminish or hurt other people. And, you know, if you stop and think about the 6.5 billion people who don't have the abilities that those of us in this class today have to get closer to our dreams, they would say, go for it, don't waste it. I've mentioned 18 things you can do to reinvigorate and renew and maintain your excitement in life and your positive excitement with others. The last, the 19th, is to remember key moments. Remember the moment before a holiday when you were a child, or before a key sports game when you were in school, your first date, your first kiss, your first published paper, your first IPO, your first marriage, the birth of your first child. These are very, very special moments. And when you renew yourself, you start to become positively infectious. And when you do, you'll find in your families, in your communities, and at work, people coming together and doing things you never thought before were possible. Thank you. God bless. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, Professor Boyatsis. That was an amazing presentation, absolutely brilliant. We are privileged to have heard you. May I invite you to visit us at Bengaluru. That would be truly an honor to meet you in person. And of course, I must thank my team for putting up these fantastic webinars. Dr. Rahul Dige, Professor Rajan, Arvind, Muhammad Imtiaz, Malati, Professor Naveen Sriram. I'd like to remind you that we have Dr. Hanluk Lim joining us from Seoul, South Korea next week. So thank you, participants, for being here in large numbers. Please do not forget to collect your certificate of participation. We have an e-certificate. And thank you once again, sir. Hope to touch base with you again. Thank you.
Thank you.